So I've known from a very early age that I was different. I realised that when I started going to school, the kids weren't quite like me. Teachers noticed and started correcting my behaviour. My parents noticed that I wasn't quite like my brothers. I was different. As I grew older, I began to realise that I was born in a world that wasn't designed by people like me, for people like me. In many parts of the world, people like me are still persecuted, discriminated against. Even in the 1950s, Barclays Bank wrote their staff a memo to allow people like me to work there. See, I was born left-handed. Throughout time, people who are left-handed have been demonized. Think about the language, about the righteous, cat-handed, 2 left feet. So the whole language around being left-handed or left-hand dominant and right-handed. I still can't use a pair of scissors properly. Who else is left-handed, by the way? Fantastic. Have you ever met someone who's proud to be left-handed? But every left-handed person I meet is proud of their left-hand dominance or left-handedness, because we are kind of a minority grouping, 12% of the population. And we have to cope with a right-handed world that does things up this way and not this way. Turn left at the end of the road. Well, left is the hand I write with but not write with, so we will have to translate things in our head to make language work for us. I'm also a Capricorn. So about you, have you got any other Capricorns? Fantastic. So when I get my horoscope out, I read the Capricorn horoscope. And isn't the best horoscope? Yeah, it is. Capricorn horoscope is always the best, isn't it? It is. Too right it is. And the other part of my identity that I've always been proud of is the fact I'm a Saturday child. So you know the rhyme, a Saturday child works hard for a living. So I've always held these things very close to my heart, being left-handed, being a Capricorn, and being a hard-working Saturday child. I just happen to be right-handed Wednesday child Taurus. Is it? That would be such a disadvantage if you are. Sorry. At this point, there's always someone in the room who goes, how did you know that was me? But what I'm trying to say is we all have something that we're proud of. Our identity. Part of our characteristic that is part of who we are, our lived experience. The things that give us value and make us unique. So when I talk about diversity, I asked, who are we talking about? Because actually we're talking about everyone. Everybody is unique. Yes, we are members of certain tribes, certain fan clubs, certain belief systems, political allegiances, people we grew up with, the way we're socialised by our parents and our culture. And those form part of our lived experience and how we see the world. But even within those groups, people think differently, have their own opinions, because they meet different people. Every time you meet somebody, you absorb some of their lived experience into your own psyche. Is that fair? So I think diversity is about leveraging our uniqueness, leveraging our differences. And that's not just how we look. It's not just about our colour, faith, our beliefs, our sexuality. It goes beyond those. Those are part of it because those give us our lived experience. But just to look at someone and say, well, you're 2 white guys, you must think the same. You're 2 black guys, you must think the same, is not true. We know that people are different. They have different experiences. And sometimes, you look at companies about their challenge for being more diverse, and they reward employee referral schemes. So employee referral schemes are going to refer someone more like you. So you're propagating the status quo. We've heard some neuroscience earlier, we've heard some conversations from Neil about we've got to wake up and think in a different way, how we see the world. A lot of the way we see the world is based on privilege, and I'll cover that in a minute, okay? So, why of inclusion? Why does it matter? So I think about this as two sides, the yin and the yang, the heads and the tails. So on one side, it's the right thing to do. It's the moral argument. It's the human thing. We don't want to be excluding people because we know we shouldn't be. But that only goes so far in a business setting. Somebody always wants the business case. Somebody always wants to understand the bottom line. So we can rebel against that. We can go, why do you need a business case? Throw our arms up in the air and saying, come on, it's the right thing to do. But we have to recognize that some people's brains work on spreadsheets, and some people's brains work in pictures, dreams and visions. So we have to work with both people. Empower the people that are passionate and advocating the people side, but also play to the logical side, the shareholder value, the business benefits as to why inclusion matters. Gartner, all these companies, McKinsey produce paper and paper and paper, or virtual paper and virtual paper, on the benefits of D&I, the benefits of inclusion, the benefits of diversity. Better customer experience. Why is that? Because if I don't represent my customer, if I don't represent, how can I think like them? How can I market to them? How can I support them? How can I address their needs? Levi's sell jeans to people who buy Levi's. They don't try and sell jeans to people who go to Millets because they're not representative of that market. And that's, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to not be representative of everybody, but it's understanding who you see as your market. Compliance. Making sure that people understand where they fit into an organization, how they're going to comply with the rules and standards. Because when people don't feel included, when there's no diversity there, people may be more risk-taking. They don't understand the value of the company. And of course, the talent pool argument. If we're not thinking about all of the people out there that we could possibly recruit, then we're narrowing down the focus on who we're going to attract or retain. About value alignment, I'll come on to culture in a minute, but if the corporate value and brand about being a diverse and inclusive organisation to appeal to multiple customers, then it meets that brand value. Is that fair? One thing I find when I'm travelling the world, speaking at organisations such as yourself, is that this culture we have, we're sitting in this battle for inclusion. We have the incumbent people in their castle. They're there to protect the status quo. They want to keep things as they are, because it's worked for 50 years. Surely it should be good enough. When we think about the business case for diversity, do we ever think of the business case for monoculture? No one's ever wrote a business case to be the same. So we can challenge that straight away. So I like to think about the people in the castle as being the status quo, the privilege, the company. And within that, we have our customers, people, suppliers. All working on different timescales, different priorities, in their own silos, creating artificial barriers. preventing fluidity of staff movement between them, hanging on to the best people, not willing to share. A whole load of reasons why companies are not embracing people and valuing them. I mean, earlier we heard about the power of people being artisans. I like to think of people as being the product. If you've got a great developer, you want to embrace that developer because they are building your product. They're no longer just a tool in the toolbox. They're actually the most important part of your process. Maybe we need to value the artisan, the producer, more than the leader sometimes. Have you read the book Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman? He talks about bullshit jobs. Bullshit jobs are people who they just move things from places to place. And his argument was we should tax people who do bullshit jobs more than people who actually produce stuff. And that way people would do less bullshit jobs. But the point I'm making is it's about valuing people for what they bring above necessarily their ability to lead or their ability to manage. It's about managing and valuing output, not how hard somebody has to grind to achieve that. And then we look at most traditional type organisations, and they start by creating employee resource groups, employee networks, staff networks, ERGs, whatever the terminology you use. And that is fantastic, to create a sense of belonging, to create an internal tribe, to allow people to be themselves, to have cultural alignment with somebody who can help you out, someone you can maybe open about some challenges you have. But where a lot of companies fall down is the way they engage with those resource groups. They're often seen as the attackers to the status quo, people to be managed on the outside, almost like the unionistic approach, collective bargaining, the old style structuring about the ERG is now the union, the people who are awkward, the people who want to challenge. What I don't see is organisations engaging with these employee resource groups in a way that makes them more effective. And I'll come on in a minute about voice, design, communications, but we should be able to leverage these groups in a different way to make them part of our business. So I'll come back to that, okay? So we think about the evolution. Go back 20, 30 years, equality was the buzzword, wasn't it? We talked about equality, the Equality Act, we had the DDA, Disability Act, we had the Equal Pay Act, we had the Gender Act in the 60s, we had all these acts where we formed legislation. And we look at the maturity model of diversity, that is the starting point, compliance, where we're following the rules. We don't want to get sued, we don't want our employees to take us to court for disrespecting them. So that is the minimum standard, the equality, or equity, as I would rather call it, treating people as they want to be treated, not the same. And then we started to talk about diversity. This is where we start to recognise that people are different, recognising about the attributes and the skills that people have. And more recently, we started to talk about inclusion as a business function. And I've been a part of some really turgid conversations in bars where we argue about whether it's inclusion, diversity, then equality, or equality, inclusion, and we're arguing about semantics, about how we order the words. And for some people that's important. But for me, inclusion, as I'll come into in a minute, is about a feeling. And that's where business is starting to evolve into now, understanding that inclusion of your people is going to leverage power. I'd like to go further than that. It's about belonging. And belonging, we can all think about what belonging means to us. How does it make you feel when you're included? What's your definition of belonging? I'll come back and talk a bit more about that in a minute. And what we're now doing is we're now focusing on, I would say, the forward-looking companies, forward-looking organisations are now focusing on their culture, their brand, and their experience. People talk about employer branding, EVPs, and then we talk about employee experience through employee engagement. And then we get a mismatch between employer branding and employer experience. Simple question, would you refer your best friend to work here? Simple question. NPS score? And that's how people aren't asking that question. We have this perception that we're a great organisation. But are we really? What do people say about us internally? I often challenge people to capture the thoughts of their people as they're driving to work or catching the train in the morning. What's going on in their head? Are they looking forward to it, vigour and passion? Or are they going, oh God, here we go again? Oh. Work is a four-letter word, not a pleasure, not something they embrace. And then do we capture what they say when they leave, when they come home in the evening? My boss, my manager, I had a better way of doing that. They've changed the goalposts. Things have changed. That project I've been working on for months, they've just canned. So how do you feel? How do you feel when you feel like that? What do you want to do when you get home? You want to shout, you want to scream, get right in the red zone. Stress levels that are high. Touch your CV up. Go, I don't need this anymore. Time passes. Oh, I'm okay again now. But this is what we're doing. We're putting employees through this change process, how they're treated on a day-by-day basis. And we need to start capturing the feelings of our people. But I like to think about transformation in that, where we start now. If we start from scratch, we start with our brand. We start with our employee experience, or how we're going to engage, who we stand for. If I own a company that is completely open with being unenvironmental, doesn't mean to say it's a bad thing. It just means to say I need to be honest about who I am. So when I recruit and I attract people, I know the sort of people that I want to recruit and attract. Otherwise, I end up with toxic conversations going on within the organisation. Royal Shakespeare Company dropped their sponsorship with BP, I believe. A number of other organisations did because they didn't align with the values. Because the brand of the RSC was one of environmental, and they didn't believe that the people who were sponsoring them met their expectations on those credentials. So we need to be very clear about who we are, what we're talking about. And I wholly believe that if we get the brand and experience right, we create this sense of belonging in our organisations. Inclusion happens because we feel that sense of being welcome. And then diversity becomes less of an issue because the culture is such that we can be ourselves. And I think equality will fall out of that because we're not creating artificial barriers to different sorts of people. So I talk about this continuum of inclusion. And I like to start with exclusion. You're not welcome. You can't come in here. This place isn't for you. That may be perfectly acceptable if it's a ride at Disney and you're only 4'6" and the minimum height ride is 5 foot for safety. There are a whole load of reasons why exclusion is valid. But often we exclude people without thinking, without design. The lift's broken, there's only steps into the building. How do people who can't use the steps access today? We clear snow off the steps before the ramp. So often people are thinking without thinking of others. They're treating the world as they want to be treated, not as the other person wants to be treated. Then we move on to tolerance. Does anyone like to be tolerated? Yeah? What a horrible word. I find that tolerance exists where there are rules, policies, regulations. Yes, you have to have this person. Yes, I know it's a stupid rule, but you have to do it anyway. But generally, as humans, as people, tolerance is not what I want to be tolerated. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to start to be accepted for who I am, the skills I bring, and what I can add and value to the organisation. But where I really want to be is embraced. Fantastic build-up. Welcome to Jo. She's going to do some amazing talk. It's really exciting. So I'm coming on. I'm fired up. All my good brain chemicals are flowing, and I want to come here and deliver a fantastic job for you. If I'd have been introduced as, oh, Jo, she's okay. She'll do. We couldn't find anybody else. Oh, cheers. Yeah. So how do we treat people in our teams? How do people treat us? Have you been tolerated? Do you get that feeling that you're not on the A list? Is it like PE at school, where the two team captains are there, picking their favourites? Yeah, you're great at this and you're great at that. Then you get down the middle order, don't you? And you'll do best of the rest. There's that one child left, isn't there? Not good at sport, bit geeky, no friends. Oh, do you have to go on my team? Oh, miss, I don't want them on my team. Okay, get in goal and don't mess up. Yeah? And sometimes we treat people in our organisations, in our teams that way. We look at the phone, it rings, and think, oh, God, I don't want to speak to them. Oh, God, they're a nightmare when they call me. All these judgments, all these biases, all these thoughts that are going through our head will then lead to negative type conversations. The wrong chemicals are flowing in your heads. This is where the biases and the prejudices start to develop. So I define inclusion as how you make people feel. How you make people feel by how you treat them. We can distill that down to any Oxford Dictionary definition, but I believe inclusion is a feeling. Do I feel included? Do I feel part of this organisation? I also believe inclusion is holistic. You can't be a little bit inclusive. I don't think you can pick and choose your inclusion. Say, well, we're okay with race and we're okay with this, but people with different gender identities, well, we're not so sure about them. They're completely different. We have to adopt this holistic approach. I would say you can't be a little bit inclusive in the same way you can't be a little bit pregnant or a little bit of a virgin. And it's active and deliberate. How many times have you heard a manager, not a leader, say, my door is always open? I don't think that's inclusive. That's pushing the responsibility back to the person. To be inclusive, I will go and sit next to you. I will ask you. I will engage. I will come and talk to you. Not once in a blue moon, but it's a kind of an everyday touch point. People see me as a person within the organisation, not in an office somewhere. I don't need to knock. So it's certainly not passive or incidental. So if you're not actively going out there, making sure your products, your culture, your brand, your people are actively included, it's incidental and passive. That's not inclusion. Intersectionality, very well-known term in the D&I space. Has everyone heard of that? Okay, intersectionality. In essence, is the interlocking systems of oppression. That's how it refers. So a black feminist lesbian named Kimberly Crenshaw coined this phrase in the 80s. And what she understood was white feminists in America at that time were put on the drawbridge. They were okay. And they didn't appreciate the extra lived experience, the extra burden of being black and female at that time was worse experience than just being white and female. We've later expanded that to link it to various other characteristics of people who are less privileged or less typical. So if you have privilege, you have power and prejudice, that leads to isms and phobias. Doesn't necessarily mean that each individual person is a racist or sexist, but the system and the processes of the organisation, the company, are built on generations of this. So we have to understand that people of multiple minority characteristics or less typical characteristics have a bigger burden to show up to work. So it's about checking your privilege. Are you? And let's not beat up the straight white guy, because when we talk about inclusion being holistic, we need everybody on board. Going back to the castle, we talk about privilege. We need the people with privilege to be allies, to amplify, to give voice. If the people with privilege don't allow us in, we'll always be on the outside throwing boulders. Think of the language when women had the vote. Men allowed women to vote. Men allowed women to vote. Men had the power, men had the privilege in the House of Commons as lawmakers. Men needed to vote to allow women to be able to vote. So what I say is, in order to make positive change, we need to involve the allies. But the conversation is for everybody to have, not sit in our silos of gender. We need to engage with men, we need to engage with the majority with the privilege as a collaborative exercise. And let's not forget, men have their own challenges of mental health, pressures, high suicide rates, fear of being seen as less masculine, fear to show emotions, and the pressure of the provider. Okay, that's a very stereotypical view of men and women, but that is the incumbent society we've kind of built on. So we can use this kind of diagram. You can Google this and see it on the internet. It's not that men put the obstacles in the path of women. It's just that men don't have the obstacles that women have. So men don't deliberately make a woman a child provider, a washer-up or a cooker, a home admin person. But the inevitability is in many relationships, that is the burden that women have to do to show up to work in the morning or to go home in the evening. Okay, so that's a quick snapshot of privilege, okay? So I always like to think of all the diversity and inclusion elements need to be rooted in understanding our privilege. Why do I think the way I do? What is somebody else's lived experience? What privileges do I have that they don't have? I need to walk in their shoes. I need to understand their burden for showing up. Okay? So let me talk about unconscious exclusion. So organisations spend millions on unconscious bias training, leadership development programs, all of these various initiatives. If they worked, we'd have gender equality by now. We'd have disability equality. We'd have racial equality. Because we'd all understand our biases. We'd all understand that the IKEA phenomenon, the affinity bias, the beauty bias, we'd all understand they were false. We'd have done something about it by now. But that isn't the reality. Because people often are afraid to admit they are unconsciously excluding people. Because they don't know they're doing it. It's unconscious. So how would they be able to admit it? So I think the first step is to acknowledge the fact that you do it. Happens in a microsecond, you don't even know it. You make a judgment about somebody. Have you ever met a recruiter that says, oh, I've got this gut feel that person's going to be okay? Yeah, I've sussed them out straight away. So gut feel, sussing them out, not sure about them, bias. From that point forward, you're always going to judge that person negatively based on that first gut feel. Oh, they smiled, they're lovely, they must be wonderful. So we've got to start challenging our own thoughts about how we exclude people. And what I want you to start thinking about is your conscious exclusion. So put yourself in a mindset where you recognize that you're doing this, or you could be doing it. I've just said something. Now, why did I think that? Why did I react that way? All the anger we see on social media, all the anger we see in the press, the debate around Mexit and Brexit, all these perspectives we're being bombarded with these on a daily basis. So how do we sift through that? Fact check. Understand why that publication, why that media feed is making us think that way. Then we can start questioning our biases and make conscious decisions to include or exclude people. Again, I think the best reason to exclude someone from being hired is because they're not good enough. They're not the right person for very meritable reasons, not subjective reasons. So we need to move to this conscious inclusion. I know I'm doing it. I've thought about it. Now I'm going to take an extra step, extra processing power in my brain to overcome my biases and say, right, let's relook at this again. Okay? And then unconsciously inclusive. It's the way we think. But we still have to go and check our biases every so often, making sure that we're clear on this. We can't get complacent that we've now got it sussed. So let's talk about culture. Conscious I've only got 10 minutes left, so I need to rattle through this. When I get on a roll, I tend to keep talking. So, I ask you, does your organisation clearly communicate its brand and values? What do you stand for? Who are you? What do you want to be proud of? What don't you want on the front page of the Daily Mirror or the Daily Mail? So we think about inclusive leadership. What does that look and feel like? And I like to think about it, from a communication point of view. Are we adaptive? Are we transformational? Are we situational, the way we communicate? Do we understand that not everybody has English as a first language? Not everybody is happy typing. Not everybody's happy reading. Not everybody can understand your humour. Do we understand where the recipient is when they receive the communication? Are they sitting on the toilet when the email pops up? Are they running for a bus and they're stressed and they look at it and go, and they react? So as a leader, we need to understand our ways of communicating and adapt to the receiver. If you're old enough to remember modems and dial-up, the first things the modems did was make that ee noise, didn't they? That was establishing how fast they could communicate, error correction, and how to retry if something didn't work. So we need to go back to those principles and learn about how to set those standards when we start communicating. And understand that every one of our people is different and unique. And we need to adapt our communication to different people in different ways. If I said this to a marketing expert, they go, of course, we need to tailor our marketing to our target audience and switch the right bulbs on in their heads. We need to do the same with our people as well. We need to think about how we want them to see us and understand what we're saying. So if I communicate and you don't hear me, you don't listen to me, then I have to take some responsibility for changing the way I communicate. As an organisation, do we listen? Oprah Winfrey once said, I see you and I hear you, and what you say matters to me. Because if you matter, if you're listened to and you have a voice, you're going to want to contribute, you're going to feel that belonging. If you don't care what I think, why am I here? Why did you hire me if you're just going to tell me what to do? Old school leader sits in a meeting and says, this is the plan and this is how we think we should do it. What do you reckon? Well, everyone says, well, you said it was good. Great leaders speak last, or not at all. They use the power of the room, the hive, the neural network that's in front of them. So we need to make sure there's room for ideas and for other people to have contributions. Great leaders understand that people are motivated differently. For some people it's flexibility, for some people it's money, for some people it's status. Some people want the parking space in the Employee Month Award. Some people would rather not be recognised and just a quick cheers, nice one. To recognise how people are motivated is important as well. And when we're looking at multicultural people, people with different backgrounds, we can't assume that one size fits all in our motivation. So we all want to be valued and rewarded differently. Can we bring our whole selves to work? It's a buzz, it's a phrase, everyone's banding it around like YOLO. I say that's easy for you to say. With your superiority privilege, your easy life, your MD hat on. How easy is it for the person who's got caring responsibilities for an elderly parent? The bus routes have changed and they now have to walk 3 miles, catch 4 buses in the rain, and they're 5 minutes late. Do we ask them, how are you? Is everything okay? Can I help? Oh yeah, if I could start half an hour later every morning, it'd be amazing, because then I can make sure my mum's okay before I come in. What we end up doing is put them on PDPs. We start managing them out, going, well, this person's not working anymore. Yeah, there's something going on. We need to fix them quickly and get them out, without actually understanding the people, their lived experience, what matters to them. But they're so scared to tell you, because it devalues their brand. What will you think of me if I share that? You'll think I'm weak. So finally, about voice. One more. Finally, about voice. Ask yourself who isn't round the table. So this is how we can use our ERGs, our employee networks, by giving them a forum, giving them a seat at the table. And again, remember, inclusion is not about making them come to us. It's about us going to them. So if the CEO, the C-suite aren't part of those employee networks to listen and feel and hear those voices, there's always going to be a disconnect. When we're doing design, when we're doing customer services, when we're looking at challenges, we need to ask the people who are doing the work, the artisans, the specialists, the people who have the knowledge, what would you do differently? People don't get bored by survey fatigue. They don't get bored when you ask them and ask them and ask them. What they get bored with is zero action, nothing happening. Coming back to having a voice. If you don't hear me, you don't listen to me, you don't care about me, why do I bother? So by design, our products, our processes must be inclusive. So let's think about a final anecdote. Thermos, the people that keep stuff hot and cold, flask. For soup, you may have seen the thermos soup flask. And I know, I'm pretty damn sure, that was designed by a right-handed person. I'm pretty damn sure it was QA'd and tested and signed off and marketing were right-handed. Because when you take the spoon out and try and eat your soup with the left hand, first thing that happens is the spoon folds up. Because it only locks when you use it with your right hand. As a left-hander, it doesn't work for me. They may have deliberately thought, well, left-handed people are only 12% of the potential market, we don't care about them. But I doubt that was in their thought process. So who isn't having a voice around the table? What perspectives aren't we considering when we're designing our processes, when we're designing our products? Who isn't it for? And it may well be deliberate. We're designing it not for you, but we're designing it for you, and that's fine. But I'm sure when they designed the thermos, they weren't specifically trying to exclude me. I'll send you these slides. So, to finalise, to summarise, inclusion, it is the right thing to do. It is also a competitive advantage. But it is holistic, active, and deliberate. Your choice how you make people feel. Thank you.